He deleted the last dating app with the same solemnity people reserved for unplugging life support. No dramatic music played. No pop-up begged him to stay. Just a quiet confirmation buzz and a blank home screen staring back at him like it, too, was relieved. That was it. No more swiping. No more bios written like ransom notes. No more pretending he enjoyed long walks, when the only walking he liked was away from conversations that went nowhere. Earthly love had officially been declared a hostile environment, and he was filing for emotional asylum. He leaned back in his seat aboard the interstellar civilian transport hub, a place so large it made cities feel like studio apartments. Outside the viewport, ships slid past like lazy thoughts, all angles and lights and species-specific design choices that screamed advanced civilization, while quietly judging humanity for still arguing about pineapple on food. He wasn't here for adventure. He wasn't here for destiny. He was here because space was quiet, and no one in the galaxy knew his ex. That alone felt worth the paperwork. The hub hummed with multilingual chatter, the kind that passed through translation fields and arrived in his ears already exhausted. He watched aliens negotiate trade routes, argue over seating preferences, and flirt in ways that looked either incredibly subtle or aggressively ceremonial. Either way, none of it involved him. That was the plan. He had sworn off love. Romantic love, specifically. The messy, expectation-filled, algorithm-corrupted kind. He was done being a profile picture with a personality summary squeezed into 3 lines and a lie. From now on, he would be unremarkable. Invisible. Blessedly incompatible. Which was why the skin caught him completely off guard. It happened as he stepped through a standard transit checkpoint, the kind that checked for weapons, parasites, and ideological extremism. A soft light washed over him, warm and mildly intrusive, like being judged by a polite god. He barely noticed it, too busy wondering if the snack vendors sold anything resembling coffee. The light flickered. Then pulsed. Then stopped. A nearby console emitted a sound best described as confused concern. Not an alarm. Not a warning. Just a tone that suggested the system was reconsidering its life choices. He paused. Looked around. No guards tackled him. No force field snapped shut. A small, many-eyed station attendant tilted her head, frowned at the screen, and tapped it gently as if encouraging it to behave. "Is everything okay?" he asked, already tired. "Yes," she said automatically, then hesitated. "Please remain still for an additional moment. Compatibility assessment is recalibrating." He blinked. "Compatibility with what?" She stared at the screen again. Her eye ridges lifted. "With everyone." That seemed excessive. He stayed still because arguing with aliens before breakfast felt like a bad personality trait. The console whirred louder, then quieter, then projected a cascade of symbols that made the attendant's skin shift colors and what he suspected was mild panic. "Is this about weapons?" he offered. "Because I once accidentally brought nail clippers through airport security and I still feel bad about it." "No weapons detected," she said faintly. "No hostility. No predatory intent. Emotional stability within acceptable." She stopped, leaned closer. "Unusual parameters." "Unusual how?" She did not answer him. Instead, she tapped her communicator. Spoke in a rapid dialect that translated into his ear as professional concern layered over disbelief. "The system has flagged you," she said finally. He sighed. "Of course it has. As a maximum compatibility entity." The words landed without meaning. He waited for them to assemble into something threatening. They didn't. "I don't know what that means," he said. "It means," she said slowly, "that statistically, emotionally, and culturally, you are rated as highly compatible with an unprecedented number of sapient species." There it was. The universe mocking him with efficiency. "That's wrong," he said. "I just deleted all my dating apps." She stared at him. "You removed yourself from voluntary pairing networks?" "Yes. On purpose." Her skin flushed a color he was beginning to associate with distress. The system does not understand why you would do that. Neither did the apps, he muttered. Behind her, another attendant glanced over, then another. Screens flickered. Somewhere deeper in the station, something recalculated hard enough to require a moment of silence. The attendant cleared her throat. You are free to proceed. Great, he said immediately, stepping away before Destiny could tackle him. Love that for both of us. He walked into the main concourse feeling lighter. Victorious, even. The scan was obviously a glitch. Humans were emotional disasters held together by caffeine and sarcasm. No galaxy-spanning intelligence was going to convince him otherwise. Then someone politely cleared their throat behind him. He turned. She was tall, luminous in a way that suggested bioluminescence rather than confidence, with eyes like polished stone and posture that radiated formal intent. Whatever species she was, elegance seemed mandatory. Excuse me, she said, her voice smooth through the translator. May I request a brief conversational exchange? He checked behind him. With me? Yes. Why? Her gaze flicked to a floating interface only she could see. I have been notified that you are interesting. That was new. I'm actually very busy, he said, which was impressive given he had absolutely nothing to do. Important human stuff. I understand, she said earnestly. May I accompany you while you do it? No. She smiled. It was subtle. Warm. Entirely too sincere. That response aligns with the projection. What projection? The one that suggests you will say no, she replied. And mean it. He frowned. That's not attractive. Her smile widened. He excused himself as gently as possible and walked faster. Another being approached. Then another. Different shapes, different voices, same polite curiosity. No grabbing. No crude advances. Just respectful interest stacked so high it started to feel suspicious. By the time he reached a seating area, he could hear murmurs. Translated snippets drifting past. Is that him? Human confirmed. Rating verified? Maximum. He sat down hard, suddenly aware that something had gone deeply, cosmically wrong. All he wanted was to be left alone. Somehow, impossibly, that had made him the most desirable thing on the station. And the galaxy, apparently, was very polite about wanting him. He tried to pretend it wasn't happening. That was his first mistake. At first, the attention came in gentle waves. Someone would sit near him, not too close, always leaving a respectful amount of personal space that somehow made the intention louder. Another would ask a question that was technically about the station but emotionally about him. A third would simply observe, eyes lingering with the intensity of someone reading a very complicated menu. He responded the way he always had on Earth, politely, briefly, and with the clear intent to disengage. Which, apparently, was catastrophic. Thank you for asking, he said to a soft-spoken, six-limbed being who wanted to know how long humans typically maintained eye contact. But I'm really not interested in whatever this is. The being's antennae trembled. I see, she said reverently. A confident boundary. He blinked. It's just a no. Yes, she agreed. A strong one. She left, but not before marking something on a floating interface that winked out of existence with a satisfied chime. 5 minutes later, someone else approached. Apologies for the interruption, said a tall figure with skin like brushed metal and a voice that vibrated pleasantly. May I ask how you cultivated such emotional restraint? I grew up poor, he said automatically. The figure's pupils dilated. Adversity bonding. Remarkable. I'm not bonding, he said. Another note was taken. He started moving, weaving through the concourse with the growing suspicion that stillness had marked him as available. Walking felt safer. Anonymous. Humans walked when they didn't want to be perceived. Unfortunately, on this station, walking with purpose apparently suggested mystery. He passed a public display and caught his reflection in the polished surface. Average height, average build, face permanently stuck in the expression of someone bracing for disappointment. Nothing about him screamed universal appeal. If anything, he looked like a man who had lost an argument with optimism and never fully recovered. And yet, he felt eyes on him. Not predatory. Not crude. Curious. Assessing. Respectful to a fault. He ducked into a quiet refreshment area, ordered something brown and steaming that claimed to be a beverage, and took a seat in the far corner. For a blessed 30 seconds, nothing happened. Then a soft chime echoed through the air. A translucent interface flickered to life above a nearby table, displaying scrolling text in half a dozen scripts before settling into his language. Public compatibility feed, verified interaction log. He choked on his drink. The interface updated. Subject exhibits calm disengagement. No hostility detected. Emotional clarity high. Below it, a rating bar filled almost to the end. "What is that?" he demanded, half rising from his chair. A small, round alien seated nearby looked up, startled. "Oh, you can see that?" "Yes," he said. "Why can I see that?" The alien blinked several times. "That is unusual. Most subjects are aware." "Aware of what?" "That they are being evaluated." He sank back into his chair. "Evaluated for what?" The alien hesitated, then lowered their voice. "Romantic suitability. Long-term compatibility. Emotional safety. Reproductive feasibility, where applicable." His soul briefly left his body, checked the situation, and decided to come back only because leaving would require paperwork. "I did not consent to that," he said. The alien's frill fluttered. "You did not opt out." "I didn't opt in." "Yes," the alien agreed gently. "That is noted as part of your appeal." "Of course it was." The feed updated again. Subject expresses discomfort with unsolicited evaluation. Displays ethical consistency. The rating bar pulsed. Climbed. "Oh, come on," he muttered. He stood up, abandoned the drink, and headed toward a quieter corridor, one not lined with seating or vendors or interested parties pretending not to be interested. As he walked, snippets of conversation drifted past him, translated just enough to ruin his peace. "He declined me without condescension. He listened for 17 seconds before responding. He apologized for apologizing too much. Did you see his posture? No mating display at all." "Exactly." By the time he reached the corridor, his personal compatibility feed, because apparently it was personal now, had accumulated comments. Most reviewed human entity, local sector. He stopped walking. "No," he said aloud. "No, absolutely not." The feed chimed in what he was starting to recognize as encouragement. He leaned against the wall and dragged a hand down his face. This was absurd. He had crossed light years to escape romantic chaos, and instead he'd stumbled into a galaxy-wide performance review of his emotional availability. He did what any rational person would do. He tried to be unappealing. The next being who approached him received a flat, exhausted stare. "I'm not interested," he said. "In conversation. Or connection. Or whatever this is. I'm emotionally unavailable and deeply boring." The being, a tall, feathered alien with bright, intelligent eyes, paused. "Fascinating," she said. "You are self-aware." "That's not a compliment," he snapped. She tilted her head. "Among my people, it is the highest one." He groaned. He tried sarcasm. That failed. He tried silence. That was worse. Silence, apparently, was interpreted as confidence, contemplation, or profound romantic patience depending on the species. At one point he overheard someone reading aloud from a review. "Human male demonstrates consistent respect for autonomy. No coercion observed. No desperation signals detected. 5 stars. "Stop rating me!" he yelled. Several aliens looked at him with admiration. The compatibility AI, wherever it was, chose that moment to update publicly. Notice: subject exceeds expected parameters. Additional data collection recommended. "Oh no," he whispered. By the time station security, who were unfailingly polite and deeply apologetic, approached to ask if he was feeling overwhelmed by communal interest, he realized the truth. He wasn't being chased. He was being curated. And the more he tried to avoid love, the more the galaxy seemed convinced he was exactly what it needed. He tried to tell himself it wasn't real. The attention, the whispers, the polite, but intense, interest from every corner of the station. It had to be some kind of bureaucratic glitch, like a cosmic error message designed to embarrass him quietly. Yet every time he moved, every polite, "No thank you," or "I appreciate your interest but I am unavailable," it seemed to amplify the attraction. Alien species that had previously treated him like any other transient human suddenly acted as though he were a rare artifact, delicate and invaluable, worthy of admiration, study, and, apparently, polite courtship. He was just trying to get from the docking bay to the transit lounge without starting an interstellar incident. That mission had failed spectacularly within 30 seconds of leaving the corridor. First, a being with translucent wings and eyes like molten glass intercepted him, bowing so low he almost tripped over himself. "I am here to understand your preferences," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "Even minor details are crucial to compatibility." "I don't have preferences," he replied with what he hoped was convincing apathy. "Interesting," she murmured, noting something on a small floating interface. She left, but another was already approaching, a squat, many-limbed creature whose species valued silence and subtle gestures. Its interpretation of his frown as mysterious interest, and his attempt to walk away as patient endurance caused another ripple of excitement in the observational AI network. He had become a legend without lifting a finger, without even intending to participate in whatever bizarre courtship ritual the galaxy had suddenly assigned him. Every polite refusal was catalogued as a virtue. Every attempt to disengage only increased his appeal. In short, his very desire for isolation had turned into an intergalactic reputation. He ducked into a quieter corridor, thinking that maybe if he moved fast enough, he could escape. That thought lasted until he passed a small observation deck where 3 more alien women were waiting, each from completely different species. They weren't aggressive. They weren't loud. They simply regarded him as though he were the sun and they were planets caught in his gravitational pull. "You seem uncomfortable," said the first, whose skin shifted in a pattern reminiscent of rainfall. "That is admirable. Resisting pressure is rare." "It's not admirable," he muttered. "It's annoying." The second, a tall, crystal-skinned being, adjusted her posture delicately. "Yet you maintain ethical clarity. That is significant. Most subjects do not," he groaned. "You're grading me?" "Yes," she said simply, as if teaching a particularly slow pupil. "But not in the way you think. You are a rare specimen." The third, whose voice resonated like chimes, hovered slightly above the floor. "We are merely observing. Data is vital." And there it was. Data. He had become a walking, breathing, emotional metric. His every reaction, refusal, and sigh contributed to a larger algorithm that had decided humans were remarkable, and he, specifically, was the human. By the time he reached the station's central lounge, a subtle hierarchy had formed. The women didn't speak over each other. They didn't compete openly. Yet the energy was unmistakable, a polite, simmering rivalry masked by formal speech and courteous gestures. Each subtly adjusted her approach to align with his perceived desires, entirely misreading his nervous avoidance as sophisticated testing. He sat at the edge of a table, trying to look small, invisible. That only encouraged more attention. He realized he could do nothing without it being interpreted. A yawn? Sign of deep contemplation. A sip of the station's brown, questionable beverage? Evidence of refined taste. Scratching his nose? Mysterious allure. He attempted to reason with himself. Humans were emotional creatures. Perhaps his natural awkwardness, his dry humor, and his stubborn insistence on personal boundaries were exactly what the AI had identified as maximum compatibility. Maybe other species found that irresistible because humans carried emotional nuance that couldn't be faked, and here he was, accidentally broadcasting that nuance on the interstellar stage. The AI's latest update pinged overhead. The interface flashed with notifications. Interaction metrics exceed expectations. Behavioral complexity unparalleled. He stared at it, imagining that somewhere, someone, or something, was handing him a trophy for being unconsciously compelling. He sighed and rubbed his temples. He had never been particularly comfortable with attention, romantic or otherwise, but this was absurd. On Earth, he could at least retreat to his apartment, binge mediocre TV, and avoid human eyes. Here, every corridor was a stage. Every polite refusal was a performance. Every attempt to eat a meal alone was potentially an audition for adoration. And yet, there was a strange, unintended thrill in it. Despite the constant pressure, the unsolicited evaluations, and the mounting network of observers, he noticed something. The women weren't demanding, weren't aggressive. They treated him with respect, admiration, and a peculiar kind of reverence. They saw him as a being of choice, not a prize to be claimed. It was, in its own absurd way, flattering. He realized then that avoiding love hadn't protected him. It hadn't created peace. But it had, unintentionally, revealed something about humans, that sincerity, boundaries, and emotional honesty could be magnetic. Not everyone would understand it, but apparently, the galaxy did. He leaned back in his chair, scanning the lounge. More observers appeared, each polite, each measured, each fascinated. It was overwhelming, exhausting, and entirely ridiculous. He had never sought romance, never cultivated charm, never even considered that his personality could be legendary across species. And now, he was at the center of a polite but relentless harem, each member competing subtly for his attention, while he frantically tried to remain unnoticed. As he sipped his brown beverage, he realized he was no longer just a human trying to escape love. He was the most reviewed, most observed, and most desired human in the sector. And the more he resisted, the stronger the gravitational pull of interest became. In trying to disappear, he had become impossible to ignore. Somewhere deep inside, he laughed quietly. The absurdity was cosmic, the irony profound, and the attention, well, maybe just a little flattering. Not enough to surrender completely, of course. But enough to make him wonder how badly he could mess it up if he tried to leave. And the galaxy, polite as always, continued to watch. He had reached the point where running no longer seemed like a viable strategy. Every corridor he entered, every lounge he thought was quiet, was already under surveillance, some by the AI, some by polite observers who had mastered the art of following without seeming to follow. He realized, with no small measure of existential dread, that the galaxy had turned him into a legend, a walking standard for emotional excellence. And legends, he found, were difficult to hide. He sat down at the station's observation deck, exhausted in every sense of the word, and let himself be watched. He had tried ignoring it. He had tried avoiding it. He had tried being unremarkable. None of it mattered. The AI had decided his fate. He was the human to be admired, the one whose every reaction would be catalogued, whose every word would be analyzed, whose emotional boundaries would be studied for centuries, or at least until the next major update. A soft, patterned hum announced the arrival of another observer, one he had not yet met. She approached slowly, her translucent wings refracting the light, giving her an almost haloed appearance. She paused before him, careful not to seem threatening. "You seem tired," she said. "Would you like to speak?" "I'd like to nap," he admitted. "Alone?" She tilted her head in a manner that was polite, curious, and maybe amused. "You are exhausted from resistance," she said. "Perhaps it is time to choose." He stared at her. "Choose what?" "To engage," she said softly. "Or not. You have options, yes?" He had options, all right. But they weren't options in the traditional sense. They were choices between increasingly polite suitors, each entirely convinced that his affection was both rare and sacred. It was a sort of reverse pressure, A romantic gravity that made even the most casual gesture feel momentous. He exhaled slowly. Perhaps it was time to confront the situation directly. If he tried to run, he would only become more magnetic. If he tried to resist, he would only become more legendary. Maybe, he thought, the only way forward was to assert control over the narrative himself. "Listen," he said, voice steady despite the ridiculous circumstances. "I did not come here to be admired. I did not come here to be desired or catalogued or reviewed. I came here because I wanted peace." The observer listened silently, her wings quivering in subtle patterns that suggested she was processing his words carefully. Other observers nearby paused as well, the entire lounge falling into a hush of attentive stillness. "I understand," he continued, "that you find me interesting. Maybe even exceptional. But I am not a prize, and I will not be treated as one. You can admire me if you wish. You can respect me. But consent matters. My choices matter." The AI, somewhere deep in the station's core, updated immediately. A calm, synthesized voice announced, "Notice, human asserts autonomy. Adjusting parameters." The room seemed to shift subtly. Observers relaxed. Some tilted their heads in curiosity, others in admiration. It was not rejection. It was acknowledgement. For the first time, he felt a measure of control return. He was still desirable, still exceptional in the eyes of the galaxy, but he was no longer a passive object. He was an agent, a chooser. One of the women, the one with wings like refracted light, stepped closer. "You value autonomy," she said. "That is rare. That is why we follow you, observe you, wish for connection." "Connection," he repeated. "Yes. That I can consider. But on my terms." A ripple of understanding passed through the room. Others nodded subtly, gestures that suggested acknowledgement of boundaries and respect for his declaration. It was strange, this feeling of being admired without being possessed. It was a balance he had never experienced, even on Earth. He allowed himself to smile faintly. Not because he was finally desired, but because he had taken control. He had declared his intentions, and for the first time, the galaxy seemed willing to honor them. He was still the same sarcastic, weary human who had deleted dating apps to escape heartbreak, but now he was something more, a symbol of choice, integrity, and emotional clarity. The AI, presumably satisfied, chimed again. "Additional observation no longer required. Human consent overrides default protocols." He exhaled. The word, finally, passed through his mind. Perhaps the universe, polite as ever, had learned something. Humans were more than algorithms could predict. They were capable of self-determination, of emotional sovereignty, of refusing to be coerced while remaining compellingly admirable. He looked around at the women who had quietly respected his declaration. Their eyes were curious, cautious, and still undeniably interested, but no longer predatory, no longer pressuring. It was admiration, yes, but framed in a way that allowed him to exist as himself, free. He leaned back and let the absurdity wash over him. He had left Earth to escape romantic chaos, only to find himself at the center of a galaxy-wide romantic legend. And yet, for the first time, he felt capable of navigating it. He could choose whom to connect with, if anyone, and how. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he knew he could always leave. There were plenty of quieter stations, empty ships, and isolated sectors where humans could hide. But for the first time, he wondered if he wanted to. Maybe being admired wasn't so terrible when it came with respect. Maybe love, or the possibility of it, didn't have to be invasive or consuming. Maybe, for the first time, he could have connection without losing himself. And in that realization, he allowed himself a small, private laugh. The AI, of course, noted it immediately and flagged it as human humor detected, highly compatible. He didn't care. He had chosen his own terms, and the galaxy would simply have to adapt. For the first time since deleting every dating app, he felt oddly, uncomfortably, in control. And that, he decided, was enough.